Welcome back to another deep dive into Fallout lore. Today, we're uncovering one of the most chilling secrets hidden in the Wasteland, a testimony from a Brotherhood scribe who discovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about the Great War. This is the confession of Scribe Delgado, who found evidence that the apocalypse wasn't global, that somewhere on Earth, civilization never fell. And the truth has been buried by every major faction for 200 years. Let's begin. My name is Scribe Delgado, and if you're hearing this holotape, I'm probably already dead. What I'm about to tell you will get me executed if Elder Maxon ever finds out I recorded it. 3 months ago, I discovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about the Great War. Everything. They taught us the bombs fell on October 23, 2077. 2 hours of nuclear hellfire that turned the world into ash. We've spent 2 centuries scavenging through radioactive ruins, fighting over pre-war scraps, building our civilization from the bones of the old world. The Brotherhood's entire purpose, our sacred mission, is built on the belief that we're preserving what's left of humanity's knowledge from a dead world. But what if I told you the world didn't actually end? What if I told you that while we were killing each other over purified water and rusted pipe pistols, an entire continent was thriving with working fusion reactors, untouched cities, and technology that makes our best gear look like children's toys? It started with a routine reconnaissance mission in the ruins of Charleston. We were searching for old military installations, hoping to find technical documents or maybe some salvageable equipment. Instead, I found a pre-war Central Intelligence Agency bunker that had somehow been overlooked for 200 years. The security systems were offline, the blast doors rusted open. Inside, the terminals were dead, but the physical archives were mostly intact. Climate-controlled rooms had preserved filing cabinets full of documents that should have been destroyed when the bombs fell. I spent 3 days in that bunker, barely sleeping, reading classified files by the light of my Pip-Boy, strategic analysis reports, nuclear targeting assessments, contingency planning documents, and that's when I found it, a series of reports from October 2076, exactly 1 year before the Great War. The subject line made my blood freeze: Southern Hemisphere Strategic Value Assessment - Final Recommendation. The analysts were thorough, I'll give them that. They'd mapped every potential military target in South America, every airfield, every port, every industrial center, every government facility. And their conclusion was stark. In a nuclear exchange between the United States and China, South America represented minimal strategic value. No intercontinental ballistic missile silos, no significant military alliances with either superpower, limited industrial capacity for weapons manufacturing. The report recommended that in scenario mutually assured destruction, South American targets should be considered tertiary priority at best. In plain English, nobody wasted nukes on them. I didn't believe it at first. How could an entire continent survive when everywhere else got turned to glass and ash? So I kept digging, found more reports, atmospheric modeling studies from the Pentagon. They knew about nuclear winter, understood how the ash and debris would spread through the atmosphere, but they also knew about wind patterns, about how the equator acts as a partial barrier for atmospheric circulation. The southern hemisphere would definitely get radiation, definitely suffer climate disruption, but the worst of it would stay north. Think about what that means. While Washington, D.C. was getting hit by Chinese nukes, while Beijing was being vaporized by American missiles, while Europe was tearing itself apart in the resource wars, South America was just watching the northern sky light up like the 4th of July. Sure, they'd feel the effects. Global temperatures would drop, radiation would spread, but they wouldn't be facing the same level of immediate devastation as us. I needed confirmation. I couldn't trust my own findings. This was too big, too impossible, so I did something that would have gotten me court-martialed if anyone knew about it. I accessed the Brotherhood's long-range communications array and started scanning for signals from the southern hemisphere. It took weeks of listening to static and atmospheric interference. I was about to give up when my Pip-Boy picked up something. A signal. Faint, but definitely there. Not in English. Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese, but I know enough to recognize what I was hearing. Weather reports, crop yields, trade negotiations between settlements. These weren't desperate survivors huddling in bunkers. These were functioning communities with enough stability to worry about agricultural output and trade agreements. That's when I volunteered for a long-range scouting mission, told my superiors I wanted to investigate reports of Enclave activity along the southern coast. They approved it without much question. The Brotherhood is always interested in tracking Enclave remnants. I took a vertibird as far south as I dared, then continued on foot through what used to be Central America. The change was gradual at first. The radiation levels on my Pip-Boy started dropping. Not much, but noticeably. The plant life looked healthier, less mutation, more diversity. By the time I crossed into what used to be Colombia, my radiation counter was barely registering. It was reading lower than some parts of the capital Wasteland that we consider relatively safe. Then I saw my first settlement. From a distance, I thought I was hallucinating. The walls were made of actual concrete, not scavenged sheet metal. The buildings had glass windows. Real glass, not plastic sheeting or wooden shutters. There were solar panels on the roofs, spinning wind turbines in the distance, and the people. They weren't wearing makeshift armor or radiation suits. They were wearing clean clothes, normal clothes, like the kind you'd see in pre-war photographs. I spent 2 weeks observing from a distance, not daring to make contact. I watched their daily routines. They had electricity, running water. I saw children playing in the streets, not behind walls of sandbags and razor wire, just playing, like the world hadn't ended, like the Great War had never happened. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. I eventually made contact with a trader who'd been traveling north. Told him I was a wanderer from the northern wastes, which wasn't exactly a lie. He looked at me like I was something out of a nightmare. My Brotherhood armor, even with the insignia covered, marked me as something wrong, something from that place where the bombs fell. But he talked to me, traded me some supplies, and that's when I learned the truth. They call themselves Los Nuevos, the new ones, descendants of people who fled south during the resource wars, before the bombs even dropped. They'd been watching us for decades. They have pre-war satellites that still function, powered by fusion reactors that never got hit. They've been monitoring our radio broadcasts, tracking the movements of our factions, studying us like anthropologists studying primitive tribes. The trader, his name was Miguel, told me about their history, how in the 2050s and 60s, when the resource wars were heating up, when the new plague was spreading, wealthy families and corporations started quietly relocating to South America. Not as refugees, but as investors. They saw what was coming. They knew the northern hemisphere was heading toward nuclear war. So, they moved their money, their technology, their expertise south. Built factories, established trade networks, created a parallel economy that existed completely outside the pre-war American sphere. When the bombs fell, these communities were already established. They had infrastructure, they had resources, they had knowledge, and most importantly, they weren't getting hit by nuclear warheads. Miguel showed me a map, hand-drawn but detailed. Federation territories spanning from the Amazon to Patagonia. City-states connected by pre-war communication networks that never went down because the satellites and ground stations never got destroyed. I asked him why they never tried to contact us, never tried to help. His answer chilled me to the bone. He said they did try in the early years after the war. They sent expeditions north to assess the damage, to look for survivors who might need assistance. What they found terrified them. Not the radiation, not the mutations, but us, the survivors, the tribals tearing each other apart over clean water, the raiders torturing, people for entertainment, the early Brotherhood hoarding technology and shooting anyone who got too close, the Enclave planning to exterminate anyone with radiation exposure. They realized that northern survivors hadn't just lost our civilization, We'd lost our humanity. We'd become violent, paranoid, desperate. Everything they'd built, everything they'd preserved, would be destroyed if they made contact. So, they made a decision. They called it El Gran Silencio, the Great Silence. They would isolate themselves, watch from a distance, and wait to see if we could rebuild our humanity before they revealed themselves. 200 years, they've been waiting, and based on what they've seen, we're not ready. The Brotherhood's crusade to control all technology, the New California Republic's expansionist wars, the Institute's kidnapping and replacement operations, the Enclave's genocidal schemes. From their perspective, we're exactly what we fear the Raiders are, just better organized. Miguel told me I could come see for myself, said there was a settlement 2 days south that welcomed northern traders as long as they came peacefully and respected local laws. I agreed. What else could I do? I'd come too far to turn back now. The journey south was like traveling backward through time, except in reverse. Every kilometer, things got better instead of worse. The radiation kept dropping. The wildlife looked healthier. I saw actual forests, not the mutated tangles we have up north. Green forests with trees that looked like the ones in pre-war pictures. When we reached the settlement, Miguel called home. I thought I'd stepped through a time portal to before the war. The town had paved roads, streetlights that actually worked, buildings made of steel and concrete, not corrugated metal and car parts. There was a market with fresh food, not irradiated meat and 2-century-old canned goods, but actual fresh produce, vegetables I recognized from pictures but had never seen in person, fruits that weren't mutated or poisonous. And the people, they were healthy, no radiation scarring, no mutations, children with all their fingers and toes, old people who'd lived full lives instead of dying young from cancer or infection. It was everything the pre-war propaganda promised the vaults would preserve, except these people had been living like this on the surface for 200 years. I spent a month in that settlement, learning everything I could. They let me stay because I was honest about who I was and where I came from. Told them I was Brotherhood of Steel, showed them my holotags. They weren't threatened. Why would they be? Our best technology is salvaged junk compared to what they have. They took me to see their power plant. It's hydroelectric, built on a river called the Parana. The dam is called Itaipu, constructed before the war as a joint project between Brazil and Paraguay. It generates 14,000 megawatts of electricity. 14,000. Do you understand what that means? The entire capital Wasteland, every settlement from Megaton to Rivet City, uses maybe a few hundred megawatts total from our scavenged generators and jury-rigged solar panels. This one dam produces enough power to run a civilization, and it's still running. They maintained it, kept the turbines spinning for 200 years. The control systems are computerized, pre-war technology that nobody in the North has been able to replicate. They have engineers who understand it, who were trained by people who were trained by the original operators. Unbroken chain of knowledge stretching back to before the bombs. I asked them about other infrastructure. They showed me agricultural centers growing real crops in real soil, not the contaminated dirt we try to farm up north. Industrial facilities manufacturing goods from raw materials, not just scavenging and repurposing old-world debris. Medical centers with technology that would make the Institute's facilities look primitive. They can cure diseases we consider death sentences. They can perform surgeries we don't even have names for. The most shocking thing? They have vehicles, working vehicles, not the rusted hulks we use as cover during firefights, actual functioning cars and trucks that run on fusion cores. They manufacture the cores themselves in factories that produce them by the thousands. Up north, a single fusion core is valuable enough to kill for. Down here, they're as common as ammunition. I spent weeks in their archives, reading their history. After the Great War, while we were descending into tribal warfare, they were consolidating. The survivors who'd fled south before the bombs already had the framework for a new society. They had Brazilian government officials who maintained legitimacy. corporate executives with resources, scientists and engineers with knowledge. They didn't have to rebuild from scratch. They just had to adapt. The nuclear winter affected them, absolutely. Temperatures dropped, crops failed for several years, people died. But they had reserves, they had infrastructure, they had organization. Where we were fighting over the last can of pork and beans, they were rationing their stockpiles and developing new agricultural techniques to deal with the changed climate. By 2100, while we were still living in caves and ruins, they'd already established the Federation, a network of city-states spanning the continent, connected by pre-war communication systems and new trade routes. They agreed on basic laws, shared resources, maintained collective defense. It wasn't perfect. They had conflicts, power struggles, territorial disputes, but they never descended into the complete collapse we experienced up north. I saw their military, not raiders with pipe guns or tribals with spears, an actual organized military with training, discipline, and equipment. They have plasma weapons, not salvaged from pre-war armories, but manufactured in their own facilities. They have power armor, different designs than ours, but just as effective. They have aircraft, working aircraft, not pre-war relics that barely fly, but maintained and serviced machines that could reach the northern wastes in hours if they chose to. And that's what terrified me most. They could reach us, they could invade, they could conquer the entire North American wasteland in a matter of months. Our factions would be helpless against them. The Brotherhood's technology, the new California Republic's numbers, the Institute's synths, none of it would matter against a coordinated force with superior resources and 200 years of uninterrupted development. But they won't. Not because they're peaceful or benevolent, but because they're practical. Why would they conquer radioactive ruins? Why would they take responsibility for millions of desperate, violent survivors who would resist every attempt to help them? From their perspective, the northern wastes are a quarantine zone, a place where humanity's worst impulses play out until we either destroy ourselves completely or learn to be civilized again. I met with one of their council members, a woman named Isabella, who'd been briefed on my presence. She was polite but firm, told me I was welcome to stay, to learn, even to return north and share what I'd seen, but I couldn't bring others back. The Federation's isolation was intentional and necessary. If word got out about their survival, about their resources, it would trigger exactly the kind of invasion they'd spent 2 centuries avoiding. She showed me surveillance footage, video recordings from their satellites and scout drones, images of Brotherhood paladins executing wastelanders for possessing pre-war technology, new California Republic troops massacring tribals who resisted annexation, Enclave soldiers gassing vault dwellers like vermin, Institute coursers kidnapping people to create synth replacements. She asked me, would I want those people to know about the Federation? Would I trust them to leave the southern continent in peace? I couldn't answer, because she was right. If Elder Maxon knew about this, he'd mobilize every soldier we have. He'd see it as our sacred duty to bring their technology under Brotherhood control. The new California Republic would see it as manifest destiny, new territories to expand into. The Institute would want their advanced technology for their own research. The Enclave, if any remnants still exist, would see it as their birthright to rule over these supposed inferiors. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. Isabella told me something else, something I'm still trying to process. The Federation has been preparing. They've watched our factions grow more aggressive over the decades, the Brotherhood expanding east from California, the new Shipona, California Republic pushing into new territories. They've concluded that eventually, probably within the next 50 years, Northern survivors will develop the capability to seriously threaten them. Long-range aircraft, improved weapons, better organization. So they're building defenses, converting their peacetime economy toward military production, training more soldiers, developing weapon systems we can't even imagine. Not because they want war, but because they're determined to remain free. If we come south with conquest in mind, they'll be ready, and it won't be a fair fight. It'll be a massacre. 200 years of preserved technology against our salvaged scraps. I asked Isabella if I could see more, if I could travel deeper into Federation territory, see their major cities, understand the full scope of what they'd built. She considered it for a long time before agreeing, but there were conditions. I'd be accompanied by guides at all times. I couldn't record specific locations or technical specifications, and I had to agree that if I ever posed a threat to Federation security, they'd eliminate me without hesitation. I agreed. What choice did I have? They took me to Sao Paulo. The city still stands, not as ruins, not as settlements built in the shells of old buildings, but as a functioning metropolis. The pre-war skyscrapers have been maintained, reinforced, upgraded with new technology. The streets are clean. There's public transportation, trains that run on schedule, buses powered by fusion engines. People commute to work like they did before the bombs fell. The population is staggering. The settlement I'd first visited had maybe 2,000 people. Sao Paulo has over 3 million. 3 million people living in one city with enough infrastructure to support them all. Up north, our largest settlements barely reach 100,000, and they're constantly struggling with resource shortages and infrastructure collapse. I watch their factories operate, assembly lines producing everything from basic tools to advanced electronics. They're not salvaging pre-war goods, they're manufacturing new ones. I saw a facility producing medical supplies, antibiotics, surgical instruments, diagnostic equipment, things we consider priceless artifacts. They produce by the thousands and distribute to hospitals across the Federation. Their agricultural system is even more impressive. They've mastered hydroponics and vertical farming, buildings dedicated entirely to food production, growing crops in controlled environments with optimal conditions. They've also cleaned large areas of farmland, removing contamination through techniques we haven't even thought of. Chemical treatments, genetically engineered bacteria that consume radiation, phytoremediation using specially bred plants. The Amazon, that massive rainforest that covered half the continent before the war, survived. Parts of it were damaged by the global climate disruption, but large sections remained intact. The Federation has been carefully managing it, using it as both a resource and a buffer zone. They harvest timber sustainably, extract medicinal compounds, study the ecosystem to understand how it adapted to post-war conditions, and they've weaponized it. The Federation's scouts aren't just soldiers, they're jungle warfare specialists who can disappear into that green hell and track targets for weeks. They've trained units that make our best recon teams look like amateurs. If anyone tried to invade through the Amazon, they'd never make it through. The forest itself has become their first line of defense. I asked about their government structure. It's complicated, but functional. The Federation isn't a single unified state like the pre-war United States. It's more like a confederation of city-states, each with local autonomy but bound by common defense agreements and trade regulations. There's a central council that handles foreign policy and major infrastructure projects, but individual cities maintain their own laws and customs. They have elections, actual democratic elections where people vote for their leaders, not the appointed positions or hereditary rulers common in northern settlements, but regular competitive elections with multiple parties and peaceful transfers of power. It sounds almost fantastical after spending my life in the Brotherhood's rigid hierarchy. Their justice system is equally foreign to me. They have courts, lawyers, written laws that apply equally to everyone. No summary executions, no might makes right. If someone commits a crime, they get a trial. If they're found guilty, the punishment is proportional to the offense. They have prisons instead of just shooting criminals or banishing them to die in the wastes. I met several of their scientists. They're continuing pre-war research, building on knowledge that was never lost. They've made advances in medicine, materials science, energy production. Things that the Institute claims to be working on, the Federation has already accomplished. They can treat radiation sickness with near-complete success. They've developed implants that can repair nerve damage. They're working on life extension technology that could add decades to human lifespan. One researcher showed me their communications network. They maintain the pre-war satellites through remote repair drones launched from ground stations. The satellites provide global surveillance, weather monitoring, and communications relay. They can see almost everything that happens on the surface. Every major battle between our factions, every settlement that rises or falls, every caravan that travels the trade routes. They've been watching us the entire time. She pulled up footage from the capital Wasteland, images of Project Purity, the conflict between the Brotherhood and the Enclave. They'd watched the whole thing unfold in real time. She showed me recordings from the Mojave, the battle for Hoover, dam between the New California Republic and Caesar's Legion, from the Commonwealth, the Institute's war with the Railroad and Brotherhood. They know everything, every major player, every significant event. They've been compiling intelligence on northern factions for 200 years. They have psychological profiles on our leaders, strategic assessments of our military capabilities, economic analyses of our trade networks. If they decided to make contact or intervene, they'd know exactly how to do it, but they won't. Isabella explained their philosophy. They call it the doctrine of preservation. The northern wastes represent a cautionary tale, a living example of what happens when civilization collapses. By maintaining their isolation, by preserving their own society, they ensure that human knowledge and culture don't completely disappear. If they intervened in our conflicts, they'd risk contamination. Not just physical radiation, but ideological contamination. Our violence, our tribalism, our desperate scarcity mindset. It's not that they lack compassion. They've debated intervention many times over the decades. There are humanitarian factions within the Federation who argue for helping northern survivors, but the pragmatists always win. Every time they've considered reaching out, they review the surveillance footage and conclude that we're not ready, that we'd destroy them given the chance, and they're probably right. I've seen how the Brotherhood treats outsiders who possess advanced technology. I've heard the New California Republic's rhetoric about civilizing the wasteland through force. I know the Enclave's plans for genetic purification. If any of our factions learned about the Federation, the first instinct wouldn't be cooperation, it would be conquest. I spent time in their military academies. They train officers using pre-war doctrine combined with lessons learned from post-war conflicts. They study our battles, analyze our tactics, identify our weaknesses, not out of paranoia, but out of practical necessity. They need to understand potential threats. Their weapons technology is terrifying. They have plasma weapons that make our salvaged plasma rifles look like toys. Energy output 3 times higher, accuracy that's computer-assisted, ammunition that they manufacture in bulk. They have railguns that can punch through power armor from a kilometer away. They have drones equipped with targeting systems that can identify and eliminate threats automatically. What would you do if you discovered your entire life's mission was based on incomplete information? Would you keep the secret or reveal the truth? But it's their defensive systems that really showcase the gap between us. They've built a network of sensor stations along their northern borders, motion detectors, radiation monitors, aerial surveillance. Anything larger than a rad roach that crosses into Federation territory gets tracked. They have response teams that can deploy within hours to investigate incursions, and they have contingency plans for full-scale invasion. Detailed scenarios for how they'd respond if the Brotherhood launched an expedition, if the New California Republic sent armies south, if the Institute deployed synths. Every scenario ends the same way: complete defeat of the invading force with minimal Federation casualties, not because they're boasting, but because the math is simple. Superior numbers, superior equipment, superior logistics. I asked what would happen if we developed nuclear weapons again, if we managed to replicate pre-war missile technology and launched an attack. Isabella's answer was chilling. They'd already accounted for that. They have anti-ballistic missile systems inherited from pre-war Brazil. They've maintained and upgraded the technology. Any nuclear strike from the north would be intercepted long before it reached their cities, and if somehow we managed to get through their defenses, if we actually hit them with nuclear weapons, their retaliation would be proportional. They have their own arsenal, pre-war weapons that were never launched, maintained in perfect condition. They could turn the entire northern wasteland into glass if they chose to, but they won't, because mutually assured destruction is exactly what they're trying to avoid. They survived one nuclear war. They're determined to never fight another. I met survivors from the north who'd made it south over the years. Not many, maybe a few dozen over 2 centuries. Raiders who fled pursuit and stumbled into Federation territory. Traders who followed rumors of a paradise beyond the equator. Wastelanders who simply walked south and kept walking until the world started making sense again. Most of them stayed. Why wouldn't they? Clean water, abundant food, medical care, safety. All the things we kill for up north, they have in abundance, but some chose to return, and the Federation let them go. Gave them supplies, sent them back north with warnings to keep what they'd seen secret. Most were smart enough to obey. A few weren't, tried to organize expeditions or sell information. They disappeared. The Federation's agents made sure of it, because they have agents in the north. Spies embedded in our settlements, gathering intelligence, monitoring for threats. They don't interfere with our affairs, don't sabotage or assassinate, just watch and report, making sure that if we ever develop the capability to threaten them, they'll know about it in advance. I asked Isabella how many agents they have operating in Brotherhood territory. She smiled and said she couldn't tell me, but she did say that some of them have been in place for decades. People we trust, people in positions of authority reporting everything back south. The paranoia that thought inspired keeps me awake at night. How many Brotherhood members are secretly working for the Federation? How many new California Republic officials? How many traders and merchants passing information to Southern handlers? They showed me their vault network, not Vault-Tec's experimental nightmares, but actual functioning survival shelters built by the Brazilian government before the war. They were designed as legitimate refuges, not twisted social experiments. When the bombs fell, thousands of civilians took shelter and survived. When they emerged years later, they found a world that was damaged but not destroyed. They joined the surface survivors and helped rebuild. The Federation opened these vaults to me, let me walk through facilities that were sealed for decades, now converted to other purposes: storage centers, emergency shelters, research laboratories. One vault had been converted into an archive, preserving pre-war knowledge, physical books, digital records, cultural artifacts. Everything we've lost, they kept. I spent days in that archive, reading history books that told a different story than what we learned. The resource wars from perspectives beyond American propaganda. The Sino-American conflict described by neutral observers. The events leading to the Great War analyzed without the bias of the combatants. It was eye-opening and devastating. So much of what we believe about the pre-war world is incomplete or simply wrong. They have entertainment, music, movies, books created after the war, 200 years of culture that developed independently from northern wastes. Their art reflects their experience, preservation rather than survival, progress rather than scavenging. They write songs about the future, not the past. They make films about exploration and discovery, not just violence and struggle. I attended a concert in Sao Paulo, an orchestra playing classical music in a restored theater. The building held 3,000 people, all dressed in clean clothes, sitting peacefully, enjoying art. I tried to imagine Elder Maxon attending an orchestra. I tried to picture raiders or tribals from the capital wasteland sitting quietly through a symphony. The contrast was so stark it hurt. Their children attend schools, real schools with trained teachers and standardized curricula. They learn mathematics, science, history, literature. They grow up literate and educated, with opportunities to pursue whatever career interests them. Not just survival skills, not just how to shoot a gun or identify edible plants, but actual education. The kind the pre-war world took for granted. I watched those children playing in a park, laughing, running, carefree. They didn't know what a raider was. They'd never seen a feral ghoul. They'd never gone to bed hungry or worried about where their next meal would come from. They were living the life that Vault-Tec promised but never delivered. The life we're all fighting to rebuild but can't seem to achieve. The hardest part was deciding what to do with what I'd learned. Isabella gave me a choice. I could stay in the Federation, give up my Brotherhood identity, live out my life in comfort and safety. Or I could return north, rejoin my faction, and keep their secret. What I couldn't do was go back and tell the truth. That would force the Federation's hand, and they'd made it clear what would happen then. I chose to return, not because I'm particularly loyal to the Brotherhood, though I suppose I am, but because I needed to see the Wasteland again with new eyes. I needed to understand if we're really the monsters the Federation thinks we are, or if there's still hope for us. The journey back north was harder than the journey south. Every kilometer, I watched the world get worse, the radiation levels climbing on my Pip-Boy, the plant life becoming twisted and sparse, the settlements getting more desperate, more violent. By the time I reached the capital Wasteland, I felt like I'd traveled from paradise into hell, and I started seeing things I'd never noticed before. The casual cruelty, the way we've normalized violence. A caravan being attacked by raiders wasn't a tragedy, it was just Tuesday. A settlement being wiped out by super mutants wasn't a horror, it was background noise. We've become so accustomed to suffering that we don't even recognize it anymore. I watched a Brotherhood patrol execute a Wastelander for possessing a laser pistol. The man had probably scavenged it from a ruin, was planning to sell it for caps to feed his family, but Brotherhood doctrine says advanced technology belongs to us, and possession by outsiders is theft, so they killed him, took the weapon, left his body for the radroaches, and I realized the Federation was right to fear us. I started investigating further when I returned to base, looking through our own archives, our own intelligence reports, and I found evidence that high-ranking Brotherhood officials knew, not about the full extent of Federation capabilities, but they knew South America had survived relatively intact. There were classified reports from scouting missions that went south decades ago, reports that were buried and sealed. Elder Maxon knows, or at least his predecessors knew. They chose not to investigate further, not to make contact, because they understood what it would mean. The Brotherhood's entire identity is built on being the preservers and protectors of technology. If our soldiers learned there was a civilization that never lost its technology, that our sacred mission was always incomplete at best and pointless at worst, it would destroy morale. It would raise questions about our purpose, so they kept it secret, classified any intelligence about South American survival, discouraged expeditions beyond a certain latitude, created a culture where asking about the southern hemisphere was seen as eccentric at best, suspicious at worst. They maintained the lie that the whole world burned because the truth was too dangerous. The new California Republic knows too, or some elements within it. I found intercepted communications referencing Southern trade, opportunities, speculative reports about untouched markets. But like the Brotherhood, they've chosen not to pursue it aggressively, probably because they understand they're not ready. Not militarily, not economically, not diplomatically. Any attempt to engage with the Federation would expose how weak we really are. The Institute definitely knows. Their agents are everywhere. Their intelligence gathering is sophisticated. They've probably been monitoring Federation communications for years, but the Institute doesn't care about the outside world beyond what immediately threatens them. An advanced civilization thousands of kilometers away that shows no interest in the Commonwealth isn't worth their attention. I realized something sitting in the Citadel archives at 3 in the morning, reading classified files I wasn't supposed to access. We're not rebuilding civilization. We're not preserving anything. We're just surviving, desperately, violently, pointlessly surviving while the real world moves on without us. The Federation has restored civilization. They have art, culture, science, progress. They're building a future. We're just fighting over the scraps of the past. And the worst part is we don't even realize it. We think we're doing important work. We think controlling a water purifier or securing a pre-war laboratory matters. Meanwhile, the Federation is designing fusion reactors and curing diseases and sending expeditions to explore their continent. I found evidence of something else in those archives, something that made my blood run cold. The Enclave had escape plans, multiple contingency protocols for evacuating key personnel to safe locations around the world if the nuclear war became inevitable. One of those locations was South America. They had properties there, bunkers stocked with gold and technology, arrangements with local officials who could be bribed. When the bombs fell, the Enclave executives on the oil rig and in other secure locations tried to activate those protocols. But the Great War happened too fast. Communications broke down. Transportation networks collapsed. Most of the escape plans never materialized, but some might have. Some Enclave personnel might have made it south before everything went to hell. If that's true, if there are Enclave elements within the Federation, it changes everything. The Enclave's ideology of genetic purity and American supremacy could be influencing Federation policy. Their scientific knowledge could be contributing to Federation technology. Their paranoia and xenophobia could be why the Federation maintains such strict isolation. Or maybe the Federation absorbed them, neutralized their ideology, integrated their knowledge while rejecting their extremism. I don't know. Isabella never mentioned Enclave presence, but she wouldn't have. That's exactly the kind of information they'd keep classified. Do you think the Federation should reveal itself and try to help the Wasteland, or is isolation the only way to preserve what they've built? I started noticing other things. Pre-war shipping manifests showing massive cargo shipments to South American ports in the months before the war. Corporate acquisition records showing American companies buying properties in Brazil and Argentina. Immigration data showing a spike in wealthy Americans relocating south during the 2070s. The clues were always there. We just never looked because we didn't want to look. Admitting that somewhere on Earth people were thriving would make our own suffering seem more pointless. It's easier to believe everyone suffered equally, that the whole world burned together, than to face the reality that we got the worst of it while others barely got touched. I've been compiling this information for 3 months now, hiding evidence in dead drops, encrypting files, preparing to smuggle it out if necessary, because I know what happens next. Eventually, someone will find out what I know, either through my actions or through their own investigation. And when that happens, the Brotherhood will face a choice. They can suppress the information, maintain the lie, continue pretending we're the last best hope for humanity, or they can acknowledge the truth and figure out what it means for our mission. I don't know which option they'll choose, but I suspect it'll be suppression. The truth is too destabilizing. Elder Maxon would see the Federation as a threat and a resource. He'd want to establish contact, assess their military strength, determine if they can be brought under Brotherhood authority. When they refuse, because of course they'd refuse, he'd start planning for eventual conflict, gathering intelligence, developing strategies, preparing for a war that might not happen for decades but would be inevitable once we decided they were enemies. The new California Republic would want to expand into South America. They'd see it as manifest destiny, bringing democracy and civilization to a continent that's already more civilized than they are. They'd send diplomats and traders, try to establish economic relationships, slowly work toward annexation. The Federation would resist, and we'd have another war. More death, more destruction. Caesar's legion would probably ignore them entirely. They're focused on conquering the immediate territories around them, rebuilding the Roman Empire in their twisted image. A distant continent with advanced technology doesn't fit their ideology. The Institute would be the most dangerous. They'd see the Federation's technology as something to be studied and acquired. They'd send synth infiltrators, steal research data, attempt to replicate Federation advances. They might even try to kidnap Federation scientists. That would definitely trigger a military response. I've thought about destroying this holotape, burning my notes, forgetting everything I saw. It would be easier, safer. I could go back to being a good soldier, following orders, believing in the mission. But I can't, because I've seen what we could be, what we should be, and I can't unsee it. The Federation proves that the apocalypse wasn't inevitable, that civilization didn't have to collapse into barbarism, that with the right preparation, the right resources, the right leadership, humanity could have survived the Great War intact. We failed not because the bombs were too powerful, but because we were too divided, too greedy, too short-sighted, and we're still failing. 200 years later, we're still fighting the same fights, still killing each other over resources and ideology, still unable to cooperate long enough to actually rebuild. The Federation rebuilt in a generation. We've had 2 centuries and we're still living in ruins. I submitted my mission report 3 weeks ago, told Elder Maxon I'd found evidence of Enclave activity in the south, but it was a dead end. No active threats, nothing worth pursuing. He accepted the report without question. Why wouldn't he? I'm a trusted scribe with years of loyal service, but I included a coded section. Information hidden in what looks like routine technical documentation, instructions for how to find the evidence I've compiled, coordinates for dead drops, encryption keys, everything someone would need to verify what I'm claiming. I don't know if anyone will ever decode it. Maybe no one will. Maybe this holotape will be the only record. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. If you're hearing this, I'm probably dead. The Brotherhood doesn't tolerate security breaches. Once they realize I accessed classified files, once they piece together what I've been doing, they'll execute me for treason. Or maybe the Federation will eliminate me. They made it clear that protecting their secret was non-negotiable. I'm a liability to both sides. But maybe this information will survive. Maybe someone will find it and understand what it means. Not just that South America survived, but that we have a choice. We can continue down this path of violence and scarcity, fighting over scraps while pretending we're rebuilding civilization. Or we can acknowledge that we failed, that we need help, that pride and ideology matter less than human survival. The Federation won't help us unless we prove we've changed. They won't risk their society to save ours. Can't blame them. We're dangerous. Desperate people with weapons are always dangerous. But maybe, if enough of us learn the truth, if enough of us understand that there's another way, we can start to change. Start to rebuild for real instead of just surviving. I've hidden copies of this holotape in multiple locations: bunkers, abandoned buildings, sealed containers in the wasteland. Someday, someone will find one. Maybe you, maybe someone else, and they'll have to decide what to do with the knowledge. Keep it secret like the leadership has. Use it to start a war, or use it to inspire us to be better. Because that's what the Federation represents. Not just survival, but proof that humanity can be better than this. That we can build societies based on cooperation instead of domination. That we can preserve knowledge without hoarding it. That we can have justice without tyranny. They did it. We can too, but only if we're willing to change everything we think we know. My name is Scribe Delgado. I discovered the truth about South America. I learned that paradise exists while we're living in hell. And I'm leaving this confession because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that the world didn't end on October 23, 2077. Only our world ended. Theirs survived. And they're waiting to see if we can survive too. If we can become something worth saving instead of something that needs to be contained. If the Brotherhood finds this before I can hide it properly, if they trace it back to me, tell Elder Maxon I died serving the mission. Tell him I believed in preserving humanity's future. He'll think that means hoarding technology and enforcing Brotherhood doctrine. But I meant something different. I meant learning from those who succeeded where we failed. I meant accepting that maybe, just maybe, we're not the last best hope. We're just survivors. And there's a difference. The Federation is the hope. We're the cautionary tale. And until we understand that, until we accept our failure, and our need to change will remain trapped in this cycle, fighting, dying, achieving nothing, while somewhere south of the equator, civilization continues, progress happens, the future unfolds. I hope you're ready for that truth. I hope someone is, because ready or not, eventually, our factions will discover the Federation, and when that day comes, we'll face a choice that will define humanity's future. Will we try to conquer and destroy what we couldn't build ourselves? Or will we finally learn the lesson the Great War should have taught us? That war never changes, but we can.